You've heard about the wonders of the Indus Valley, the drains, the bricks, the perfectly planned cities. But no one ever talks about you, the farmer who built it all, bled into the soil, and vanished without a name. This is not the story of kings or priests. This is the story of what it really felt like to live there. You wake up before the sky does. The stars are still out, and the dirt you sleep on is still damp from the night. But your bones are already sore from sleeping on what is technically a floor, but spiritually just another patch of cursed earth. You stretch. Something pops. Might be your back. Might be the gods. No time to dwell on it. You are a farmer in the Indus Valley. That means one thing. You don't own your life. The land does. The dirt under your feet. It decides when you eat, when you sweat, and when you collapse. It's your boss, your god, and your coffin. You can call yourself a provider, but really you're just the local offering. Your house is made of mud bricks, the same kind you'll be expected to make more of when the walls start melting in monsoon season. The roof leaks, the walls flake. It smells faintly of cattle dung, mold, and old curry smoke. Basically your life in scent form. Your neighbors say you're lucky. You have a granary nearby, a working water channel, and a goat that hasn't died yet. Luxury. You dress yourself in what's left of yesterday's cloth. Your legs are sore, your arms already ache, and you haven't even picked up the plow. Outside, the land stretches on, flat, indifferent, and just wet enough to promise false hope. You squint at the sky. Clear. That's bad. You need rain, but not too much rain. Just the right amount, and at the right time. In other words, you're screwed. You check the irrigation ditch. Water's flowing, barely. You'll have to unclog it again. Probably with your hands, because tools are expensive and thumbs regrow. The silt stinks of rotten fish and spiritual surrender. You do it anyway. You always do. Your ox is staring at you like he knows something you don't. Which, honestly, he probably does. He's stronger than you. He eats better than you. He doesn't have existential dread about whether the barley will make it to market before another priest declares a bad omen and demands a sacrifice. Which might be your goat, or your child, or honestly just you. As you dig your heels into the wet ground and start to plow, it hits you. You don't plow the land plows you. Your feet sink in. Your body bends. Your dreams evaporate like morning mist. All this so the elites in the city, the ones living near the Great Bath, with their fancy seals and perfectly aligned streets, can eat wheat and argue about divine purity. You've never even seen the inside of the granary. You imagine it's full of grain. And hope, probably rats too, but mostly grain. Meanwhile, you chew on a bit of old lentil paste and tell yourself it counts as breakfast. It doesn't, but neither do you. You glance down at your hands. Cracked, bleeding, caked in mud. The same mud that feeds the city, drowns your seedlings, and swallows your identity whole. If the river shifts course again, your farm, and the 10 miserable years of effort behind it, might just disappear overnight. And no one in the priestly quarter will care. You'll be forgotten before the water even dries. You try to hum a song, something your grandmother used to sing while planting sesame seeds. It's the only part of her legacy that survived the last flood. That and a wooden spoon. The spoon broke last year. By mid-morning, the sun is a glowing coin dropped onto your head by an indifferent god. Sweat soaks through your tunic. The flies arrive like tax collectors. The field stretches on, and on, and on. So does your regret. You consider reincarnation. Maybe next time you'll come back as a sacred bull, or a priest, or literally anything other than a half-starved dirt gremlin with a hoe and hope in a place where both break easily. But for now, there's grain to plant, weeds to fight, ditches to dig, tools to repair, a stomach to ignore, and a sky that couldn't care less. Because in the Indus Valley, you don't own the land. The land owns you. It's the middle of the night, but you're already half awake. Not because of a bad dream, but because the wind outside sounds suspiciously like it's trying to steal your roof again. You shift on your bed, a generous word for the flattened pile of straw and regrets, and feel something crunch under your shoulder. It's either a dead beetle or part of the wall. You don't even flinch anymore. You just brush it off like yesterday's dignity. Your house isn't so much built as it is coaxed into standing. It's made of sun-dried mud bricks, a substance as dependable as a drunk oracle and about as waterproof as a woven basket. When the builders, probably your grandparents and some guy with one eye and a hangover, stacked those bricks decades ago, they didn't think long-term. They thought, well, the cows need somewhere to not sleep, so let's throw up 4 walls and see who survives the monsoon. And now here you are, living in it, barely. The walls flake constantly, shedding like a sick goat. You sweep up little piles of dust every day just to keep the house from becoming shorter. There's a permanent crack above the doorway that looks suspiciously like it's been smiling at you for years, waiting to split open and drop half the ceiling on your grandmother during dinner. The roof, crafted with love, reeds, and a hefty dose of denial, leaks like it's on strike. When the rains come, and oh, they will come, you don't have a ceiling. You have a sieve. You've lined the inside with whatever you could find. Old sacks, bits of hide, even palm leaves you stole from the priest's garbage. Nothing works. You've given up trying to stay dry. Your only defense now is bucket rotation and wishful thinking. And yet, somehow, this home is considered nice. The neighbors are jealous. You've got walls that mostly stand, a fire pit that only sometimes fills the place with smoke, and a clay floor that only floods during bad storms. You don't mean to brag, but your door has an actual hinge. It's just a leather strap nailed into wood. But it counts. The entire house is one big, open-plan panic box. There's no separate bedroom, just corner zones. One for sleeping, one for storing tools, one for worshipping whatever god might pity you this month, and one that the goat has unofficially claimed as his toilet. You've asked him to stop. He doesn't care. The fire pit sits in the center, blackened from years of desperately cooked lentils and smoke. Your lungs are permanently flavored with charcoal and sorrow. You tell yourself the burn in your throat makes you stronger. It doesn't. It just means you cough when you laugh. You store your grain in clay jars, some inherited, some stolen, all cracked. The rats know them well. You've named the boldest one Merchant, because he shows up every night to redistribute your wealth. You hate him, but there's a weird mutual respect now. He steals with style. At night, you hear everything. Every creak, every drip, every whispered prayer from your aunt in the corner as she hopes the gods will spare her from another roof collapse. She was buried under a wall once. Twice if you count the dream she had during the first fever season. Your uncle snores like a dying ox. The baby wakes up every time someone blinks. The chicken sleeps on your pillow. You don't argue. She's got seniority. Privacy doesn't exist. Neither does silence. Or comfort. You once heard a merchant from the city describe his rest chamber. A room with cushions, incense, and a water jug just for bathing. You've got a corner with a cracked bowl, a damp rag, and a stick to chase away snakes. You think it's the same thing. The worst part? This house, this mud box of misery, is a legacy. You'll pass it down. Someday your child will sleep in the same damp straw, under the same groaning roof, dreaming the same half-dead dreams about escaping to the city. And when their child is born, they'll patch the same cracks with the same clay and say, "This is home." Because in the Indus Valley, you don't live in a house. You live inside an unspoken agreement with gravity, rot, and time. And you're losing. There's no rooster, You are the rooster. If you're lucky, the stars are still faintly twinkling when your eyes drag open, half glued shut with sleep and grit. But it's not even the light that wakes you. It's the sound of your own mother stirring the ashes of yesterday's fire, hoping the embers haven't gone cold. Because if they have, congratulations. You get to spend your morning coughing over wet kindling and whispering insults at damp twigs. The floor's already cold and damp. The straw that was supposed to be your mattress has migrated overnight to the corners, where the goat now sleeps like royalty. Your spine clicks as you sit up. That's normal now. You don't remember the last time your back didn't feel like it was threatening a permanent rebellion. Your first thoughts aren't spiritual. They're logistical. Where's the water? Who's walking to the well today? Is the ox still alive? Did the storm drown the seedlings? Did the priest sacrifice your good chicken again? It's like running a business, except the business is poverty, and you're both the CEO and the unpaid intern. There's no coffee, no tea, no warm anything. You chew a mouthful of cold barley mash leftover from last night. It tastes like mud, sadness, and the vague hope that your teeth don't crack. Then it's outside into the wet morning air, where the mist is thick and the road is still sludge. You squint into the distance and see nothing but gray fields and gray sky. The sun isn't up yet, but that doesn't matter. You are. The work begins immediately. There's no schedule, just tasks, and tasks are eternal. You haul water, clear debris from the irrigation trench, check the soil, untangle the plow harness, and mentally prepare for yet another 14-hour shift where the reward is not starving. Your ox doesn't want to move. Neither do you, but you both do, because there's no alternative. Because this is the Indus Valley, and while the cities have drains and luxury baths, you have mud and resolve. The plow groans. You groan louder. Your bare feet slide in the wet field, and you wonder if the soil is even fertile this year or if the gods are playing their usual cosmic prank again. You know what bad soil means. It means less grain. Less grain means less trade. Less trade means no pottery. No pottery means the rats get everything, the entire food chain, and somehow you're still at the bottom. By midday, the sun is directly overhead, baking the mud into a sticky, clumpy trap that grabs your ankles with every step. You take off your tunic to keep cool. It doesn't help. You're coated in dust, sweat, and the distinct scent of someone who's been fertilizing his own destiny for a decade too long. You eat lunch crouched in the shade of your ox, who farts directly in your face and ruins the only peaceful moment of the day. You munch on half a flat cake and a few boiled lentils, chewing slowly like you're rationing not just food, but hope. You don't speak. Talking wastes energy. Thinking hurts. In the afternoon, the fields don't get easier, they get angrier. The sun has turned the mud to cracked clay. Your hands blister. Your neck burns. The plow will cracks. You fix it with twine and optimism. Both are running low. By evening, your muscles are humming. Not in a good way, but in that shrill, nerve-ending kind of way that says, lie down now or die standing. The sky turns pink and gold, like a beautiful lie painted just for you. The priest will say it's a sign of favor from the gods. You know it's just a warning that tomorrow's going to be even hotter. You stumble home. Your feet leave muddy ghosts across the floor. You collapse next to the fire pit, and someone hands you a bowl of soup, the thin kind, mostly water, mostly salt. You drink it anyway, too tired to complain, too tired to taste. You watch the flames flicker, then flicker out. Darkness wraps around the house. Somewhere, the priest lights a ceremonial lamp. You light nothing. You lie down, aching, cracked, buzzing with pain. You close your eyes, and for a brief second, you don't exist. Then the baby cries. The ox farts again. A rat chews on your sandal. And tomorrow, you'll wake up before the sun, and go to bed after it dies. You'd think farming would be hard enough. You've got aching limbs, unpredictable weather, and a hoe that's mostly held together by prayer and leftover string. But no, the real tyrant in your life wears no crown, needs no army, and doesn't even have a face. It's the river, the great, beautiful, temperamental beast that everyone worships in poems and curses in practice. It doesn't have a name you're allowed to say without spitting afterward. But you know it. You feel it. Every year it decides on a whim without warning whether you'll live comfortably or spend 6 months begging the city granary to accept a goat as rent. When it's generous, the river blesses your fields with dark, rich silt. Crops grow fast. Barley heads swell. Lentils don't look like shrunken mosquito corpses. You get enough food to eat twice a day, maybe even sell a little on market day. People smile. Babies stop crying. The rats eat slightly less of your harvest than usual. It's almost like hope. But the river doesn't like being predictable. And it definitely doesn't like you. Because sometimes it just moves. One season you're living on the riverbank, and the next you're living in the river. Your entire field, the one you spent months planting, is now underwater. Not even usefully underwater. Just flooded and dead. You scoop handfuls of ruined grain and wonder if the gods are bored or just deeply petty. Worse, the river doesn't even stay consistent year to year. Last year, it barely flowed. The irrigation canals turned to crust. You prayed, you sacrificed, you danced badly, and still dust. The barley withered in your hands. Your ox gave you side-eye for a month. Your neighbors started rationing water by whispering to it. This year, it decided to be generous, and by generous, I mean destructive. Flash flood. Walls collapsed. Homes sank. Cows floated by like confused boats. You grabbed your family and climbed onto the roof, which gave out an hour later. You remember drifting on a woven mat, screaming at a chicken to swim. The priest said it was a holy cleansing. You said something unprintable. And when the waters finally recede, you get mud soup, not soil, not usable land, just thick, sticky, root-choking sludge. Try planting in that. You do, because you have to, but the seeds rot, and so do your expectations. There's no real planning around the river, no calendars that help. No fancy priest with a stick can predict what this watery sociopath will do next. The officials in the city, the ones who never get wet, love to say things like, "The river is the source of all life." Yeah, it's also the source of all your ulcers. You've tried to tame it, dug channels, built dikes, even offered it the ceremonial goat twice. You really liked that goat. But every time you think you've understood it, the river changes course. Not just in temperament, physically. You wake up one day, and your livelihood is half a mile to the left. You follow it like a desperate ex. And the city, they don't move the roads. They don't move the markets. You move. You always move. You've heard stories that someday the river might dry up completely, that the gods will get tired, the clouds will forget how to rain, and the water will vanish. You wonder what happens then. Will the cities fall? Will the priests stop preaching? Will the rats finally form a democracy? More likely, you'll just keep digging, keep planting, keep chasing the river's shadow like it owes you something. Because it does. It owes you everything, and it knows it. But the river doesn't care. It never cared. It just changes its mind. And you, as always, adapt or drown. You've never seen a weather scroll. You've never studied meteorology. You don't have a priestly education in seasonal cycles or a sacred stick that tells you when it's going to rain. What you do have is knees that ache right before the sky ruins your life. And they're aching now. That can only mean one thing. The monsoon is coming. Of course, nobody ever tells you when it's supposed to start. There's no stone tablet in the village square with cloud updates. The priest claims he can smell it in the wind, which mostly means he sniffs dramatically and then goes back to his wine jug. But you know the truth. The monsoon doesn't arrive like a guest, kicks your door open and uses your house as a mop. First, it teases you. A few gray clouds, a nice cool breeze, maybe even a little sprinkle that makes you think, ah, finally relief. This is a trap, a lie told by the sky, because when the monsoon really arrives, it doesn't just rain. It attacks. The first thing to go is the roof. It doesn't fall off. It just starts weeping from every angle, like it just found out how you really feel about your life. The mud walls melt. The floor squelches. Your storage jars begin floating slightly to the left, like they're trying to evacuate without you. The goats panic. The chickens riot. The ox looks at you like it's your fault. Probably is. You dared to hope for moderate rain. Your fields, which a week ago were sun-baked deathbeds, are now mini swamps. You wade through them with your sandals tied to your belt because they've become useless boats. You try to check on your barley, but there's no barley. There's just a soupy mess of drowned stalks and mosquitoes that now claim this land as their kingdom. And speaking of mosquitoes, you didn't think it was possible for something so small to make that much noise. They hum like an army. You can't tell if they're biting you, yelling at you, or trying to carry you off in chunks. You slap wildly at your neck and hit your cousin instead. Nobody apologizes. Back inside, the fire's gone out. Your only dry spot is under an overturned basket, which is also currently occupied by a wet, angry chicken. You don't even argue. You let her have it. She's earned it more than you have. Food storage becomes a nightmare. Everything is damp. Your lentils, wet. Your wheat, moldy. Your last preserved pickles, somehow both sour and soggy. You dig through clay jars like you're in a game show called Find the Least Rotten Dinner and lose every round. You try to sleep, but the constant drip, drip, drip of water leaking through a dozen ceiling holes feels like a form of ancient psychological torture. Every drop lands somewhere awful. On your forehead, your food bowl, your back, your one dry blanket. The blanket now smells like shame. And just when you think it's finally over, when the rain slows, when the sky turns that pale post-storm gray, you step outside and sink up to your knees in what used to be your front yard. The neighbors are already arguing over whose latrine overflowed into whose house. The smell confirms it was everyone's. The priest appears. He declares the rain was a blessing from the gods. You smile politely. Internally, you want to baptize him in your flooded kitchen. Because here's the thing. You don't know what monsoon means. Nobody does. But you do know that every year, like clockwork, it breaks your crops, your roof, your dignity, and your will to live in that order. They say the rains are necessary. They say they bring fertility. They say they make the Indus Valley thrive. Maybe they're right, but they don't have to sleep next to a soaking wet goat under a collapsing roof in what smells suspiciously like floating manure. You do. Here's how farming in the Indus Valley works. You plant, you sweat, you suffer, and then somebody else eats. You don't grow food for yourself. That would be cute. You grow it for the system, for the market, for people who have never walked through mud up to their shins while swatting mosquitoes with one hand and digging out a flooded drainage ditch with the other. People who live in cities, tall, brick-lined, suspiciously clean cities, where water flows where it's supposed to, and the only animals they deal with are goats already roasted. You've never been to one of these cities. You've seen them, rising in the distance like smug little palaces of sophistication. Their towers are perfectly stacked. Their roads don't suck your sandals off your feet. Their homes have drains. Drains. You dream of drains the way children dream of sweet cakes. But that's not your world. Your world is the in-between, the fields, the fringes, the work that makes the cities possible, but which the cities pretend doesn't exist. They write about the glory of Harappa, the genius of Mohenjo-daro. No one writes about the mud-caked, bug-bitten lunatic half-starved in the barley fields who made their wheat surplus possible. You grow barley, lentils, chickpeas, sesame, cotton. Sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to be cursed with cash crops. Crops that don't feed your stomach, just someone else's trade empire. They call it agriculture. You call it organized starvation. You don't decide what to grow. That's decided by someone in the city. Some priest, merchant, or official who once visited a farm during festival season and now thinks he understands the land. He sends word, "This year, sesame." You grit your teeth and smile. Sesame it is. Even though the fields are wrong for it. Even though the rain's been late. Even though you'll have to sleep next to your fields with a stick to chase off crows like a desperate scarecrow who knows too much. When harvest comes, you load up baskets and carts and sacks. You don't rest. You don't celebrate. You carry. To the market depot. To the granary. To that big brick building where scribes weigh your blood-stained yield and nod without looking at your face. They tally numbers. They hand you a receipt written in seals and pictograms you can't read. You nod and thank them. You pretend this isn't theft. You keep a small portion. If you're lucky, if you harvested enough, if the rats didn't take their cut first, if the city officials didn't need extra tribute for temple repairs, if the priest didn't claim your barley had a bad aura and demand it be burned. Meanwhile, you hear rumors about city life. That some people eat 3 times a day. That they drink water without having to strain bugs out of it first. That they buy food with little carved tokens and never once ask the sky for mercy. You try not to think about it. Instead, you pull weeds. You mend the ox harness. You mutter to your barley like it's a child that never calls. And as you kneel in the dirt under a blazing sun, your back screaming and your stomach hollow, you remind yourself, this is for the city, for people you'll never meet, for homes you'll never enter, for tables you'll never sit at, for children who don't know your name, but eat your grain with clean hands. You are not a farmer. You are a ghost servant in a system that smiles politely while eating your life. You spend all day in the fields, bending, digging, tending, cursing. Your hands are stained from pulling weeds and spreading manure with tools that should have been retired during your grandfather's lifetime. Your knees are permanently caked in dirt. Your back hasn't been straight since the last eclipse. And yet, when the sun finally drops and it's time to eat, you wait, because here in the Indus Valley you don't eat first. The grain you harvest, it goes to the granary, not your family's little stash under the fire pit. I mean the big one, the state one, the one with the long ramp, the guards, the scribes, and the city official who smells like rosewater and passive aggression. They collect your wheat like it's a tax, which it is. But don't call it that. It's a contribution to civic stability, which is city speak for "we'll take that, thanks." After that, you get what's left, what didn't rot, what the rats didn't drag away, what the priest didn't declare ritually impure, what the ox didn't trample, what you didn't have to offer to the gods to stop the rain, or start it, or explain why the moon looked weird last night. And even then, you don't get to eat right away. First, you feed the children, then the elders, then the priest if he shows up uninvited, which he always does, then the ox because you'll need him tomorrow, and gods forbid he pulls a plow on an empty stomach. Then the dog, who technically doesn't belong to anyone, but has lived on your doorstep long enough to qualify as extended family. And then, maybe, you sit in the corner, legs aching, staring into a clay bowl of overcooked lentils and a handful of broken wheat like it's a feast from the heavens. You don't even chew. You just absorb. Your stomach doesn't even gurgle anymore, it sighs. Sometimes you think, I grew this. Then you think, so why am I still hungry? And God's help you if there's a festival. You know, one of those celebrate abundance ceremonies where most of the village lines up to donate grain to the temple, while a man in white robes waves incense and chants like he doesn't own a comb. You give your best barley. You smile like it's a privilege. Then you go home and boil water again, hoping your children don't ask why dinner tastes like sadness. You once dreamed of surplus, of baskets overflowing, of eating until you were full, maybe even sleepy. That was before you realized the system isn't built to feed the farmer. It's built to feed everyone else. So you keep planting, keep harvesting, keep giving, and when it's time to eat, you wait. The city granary is a marvel of engineering. That's what they say. Tall brick walls, massive platforms, perfect ventilation. It sits on a high mound like a sacred vault, towering above your tiny clay hut as if it were a temple of abundance. You look at it from the fields, sweating, hungry, sunburned, and think, all of that came from us. You and the other farmers fill it, sack by sack, basket by basket. Every harvest season, you drag your yield to the granary courtyard. You wait in line with your ox, who's just as miserable as you, and present your offering like a peasant at a royal feast. The city official, a scribe who's never touched soil in his life, inspects your grain with delicate fingers and an expression like he's doing you a favor by not sneezing on it. He weighs it. He measures it. He nods. Then he tells you, "Thank you for your contribution to the prosperity of our civilization." You smile because you're not allowed not to. Then you go home and scrape the bottom of a half-empty jar, hoping your children don't notice how much smaller dinner was than lunch. Because you don't get your grain back. Not really. Not the good stuff. Not the fat, golden barley heads or the clean sesame seeds. Those go to the city, to the priests, the merchants, the guards, the scribes, the people who live behind walls and don't even know your name. You, meanwhile, get distribution rations, a polite term for whatever's left after the rats, mold, and ceremonial donations have had their share. A few handfuls here, a chipped basket there. If the harvest was bad, you get even less, despite being the one who worked the hardest to save it. You once asked where all the grain goes. A scribe told you proudly, "It feeds the people." "Which people?" you asked. He laughed. "The city, of course." You nodded like that made sense. Because if you didn't, someone would say you were disrupting social harmony, which is priest talk for get back to work before we accuse you of cursing the wheat. The granary is guarded, always, not just by men with spears, but by layers of ritual, politics, and invisible chains. You could never take from it directly, not even in a crisis. You'd starve 10 feet from your own barley while the priest performs a blessing on surplus grain stored for ceremonial use. Sometimes, late at night, you pass by and hear the rustle of stored wheat shifting under its clay roof. The sound drives you mad. It's not just food. It's security, stability, future, survival. All of it piled high, brick by brick. And none of it belongs to the people who bled to put it there. Your stomach growls, but the granary stays locked. Because in the Indus Valley, the sign of a successful civilization isn't how well it feeds its workers. It's how well it hoards what they produce. So you chew your stale bread. You boil your lentils down to soup. You give the last piece to your child and lie about not being hungry. Because the granary is full. But that doesn't mean you are. There are 3 things that keep your crops alive: the sun, the soil, and the canal. The first 2 are out of your control. The third, technically you can influence it, in the way that screaming at a boulder influences gravity. Your entire livelihood depends on a zigzagging, half-collapsed trench carved through the earth generations ago by people who were either geniuses or deeply tired. It snakes its way from the river to your field like a lazy, sacred vein, carrying water, and with it, life, to everything you grow. Until, of course, it doesn't. And when the water stops, you don't just lose a harvest. You become part of someone else's. Because irrigation failure in the Indus Valley isn't just inconvenient. It's catastrophic. It's not, oops, the crops are thirsty. It's, congratulations, we've triggered famine roulette. And you, proud, aching, sunburned you, are the prize. The signs are subtle at first. The water flow slows. The ditch starts to clog with silt and dead frogs. You grab your digging stick, the one with the handle that gives you splinters, and start scooping. You dig and bail, slap mosquitoes off your arms, and try not to notice that your neighbor's canal is flowing just fine. Suspiciously fine. So you argue. You shout. He shouts. The priest comes out and declares that water disputes are to be resolved peacefully. Then he takes your neighbor's side because your neighbor offered him a fresh jar of ghee and you, tragically, did not. So your fields stay dry. Your barley shrivels like overcooked reeds. The sesame goes brittle and coughs itself back into the earth. Even the weeds start packing their roots and moving somewhere damper. You try to carry water by hand, staggering with jars up and down the trench, dumping them into the cracked soil like you're trying to undrown a fish. It's not enough. Your family eats less, then less again. The grain jars empty. The lentils vanish. You start grinding wild seeds and pretending they're food. Even the dog gets skinny. The goat eyes your ankles like they owe him something. And just when you think it can't get worse, the priest arrives. He announces that your fields have offended the gods, that your dried-up stalks are a sign of spiritual corruption, that maybe you need to purify your soil with a ritual that involves offerings, like grain, or your one remaining hen. You consider offering him to the gods instead. But you don't, because you're tired and hungry and everyone's watching. So you smile, you bow, you give up the hen, and now you have no food, no crops, no future. But at least the priest is happy. When famine finally hits, it hits the farmers first. Of course it does. The granaries stay locked. The cities close their gates. The people who still have food aren't the ones who grew it. They're the ones who taxed it, stored it, controlled it. And you collapse next to your useless, thirsty field. And someday, when the rains return and the canal flows again, and the soil is rich from the sacrifices of this season, a new farmer will plant barley over your bones. Because in the Indus Valley, if the irrigation fails, you become fertilizer. You've been dying for a while now. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just the slow, brittle sort of dying that creeps into your spine after years of bending over half-dead lentil stalks, breathing moldy air, and drinking water that smells like yesterday's goat bath. But no one cares about that kind of dying. That kind of dying is normal, expected even. You could collapse in your field tomorrow, face down in the same dirt you've been tending since childhood. And the only thing anyone would say is, do you think he finished the weeding first? Because in the Indus Valley, a farmer dying is like a pot breaking. Inconvenient, but easily replaced. They might burn a bit of incense, say something polite. The village elder might nod solemnly and declare it the will of the ancestors. Then your tools get handed to your cousin, and life goes on. Quiet death? Acceptable. But gods help you if you die wrong. Wrong death means the kind that causes trouble. You die in the middle of temple season? That's bad optics. You die during a flood ritual, and now the priest has to re-bless the canal with double incense and half a goat? Unforgivable. You die in front of a tax collector? Now they have to reassign your obligations and audit your grain receipts. Congratulations, you're a paperwork emergency. The priest doesn't like unplanned deaths. They mess with the ritual calendar. Your soul might not make it to the right spirit tier. It might haunt the village latrine or confuse the rice harvest. Worse, if you weren't properly purified before your final gasp. No fasting, no chanting, no scented oil on your crusty forehead. Your spirit might become bad luck. Not powerful enough to be a demon, just inconvenient, which is somehow worse. There are rules about dying. If you're a farmer, you're supposed to die privately, preferably while no one's looking, preferably after you've harvested. Not during planting, not during monsoon, definitely not during the king's birthday month. And if you're going to make a noise about it, you better be a priest, or at least someone with decent sandals. You think sometimes about staging a scene, collapsing dramatically during a city festival, screaming your final breath into the clay walls of the temple. Something big, something they'd remember, something that forces them to look at you, really look at you, for once. But then you realize, even that wouldn't work. They'd still blame your death on bad omens, or impure thoughts, or poor diet, as if you had a choice. They'd sweep you off the temple steps, purify the air with crushed flowers, and carry on with the ritual. The crops must grow. The system must flow. The people must eat, even if the ones who make the food rot alone in their fields. So you don't die loud. You die quiet. In your sleep, maybe. In a ditch, probably. In the shadow of the granary, absolutely. Because in the Indus Valley, your life doesn't belong to you. And your death? It's only important if it messes with the schedule. There's a smell that follows you, clings to your skin, your clothes, your soul. It doesn't wash off, mostly because you don't have time, water, or social status to wash anything off in the first place. It's a blend of three powerful ancient forces: cow dung, fire smoke, and generational regret. The cow dung's obvious. You live with cows. Not on a farm in the quaint sense, I mean literally with them. They sleep next to your walls. They fart during your meals. They step on your tools. Their breath is the last thing you feel before your eyes open in the morning. And their manure? It's everywhere. On your sandals. On your floor. In your fingernails. You use it as fuel. You use it as plaster. You've probably used it as shampoo during the worst drought of your life. You don't even flinch anymore. You just breathe it in and hope your lungs forget how to complain. Then there's the smoke. The holy smoke, as the priest insists on calling it. Every meal is cooked over a fire that sits in the middle of your house like an angry spirit. It doesn't vent. It doesn't rise. It just hovers, lingers, creeps into your pores. By mid-morning, your eyes are redder than a festival flower, and your cough sounds like you swallowed gravel. Your tunic smells like a burnt offering. Your hair has achieved a level of crispiness not seen outside temple sacrifices. And finally, disappointment, the most ancient scent of all, comes not from the environment, but from you. From the dreams that didn't pan out. From the hope you quietly buried under the same field where your brother got heatstroke. From the realization that your best-case scenario is not starving in front of your children. The city folk have perfumes, oils, scented cloth. The priest wears imported cinnamon bark on festival days. You once tried rubbing wild mint on your armpits. It lasted half a morning and made the goat sneeze at you. Now you don't bother. You've developed the kind of body odor that can clear a ritual circle. People don't even stand downwind of you anymore. They stand sideways, pretending to stretch. You once caught a merchant holding a dried flower to his nose while speaking to you. You weren't offended. You asked for one. Even your children have started using phrases like, "Dad smells like harvest season," and not in a poetic way. But the worst part? You're used to it. You don't even smell it anymore. You just carry it. Like a curse. Like a uniform. The scent is your identity now. It tells people who you are without you opening your mouth. This one works the land. This one burns his lungs to feed the rich. This one sweats and bleeds and sleeps with livestock. This one is disposable. So you smell like cattle. You smell like smoke. And you smell like the dreams you had when you were too young to know better. You are the incense of suffering. There are little carved things everywhere. On jars, on tablets, on stone weights, on the door of the granary, even on the side of the tax collector's personal ox cart, which you once accidentally sneezed on and almost got fined for. These things, these little mystical stampings, are everywhere, and they rule your life. They're called seals, and they might as well be magic. You don't know what they say. No one you know does. You can't read. Neither can your father, or his father, or your neighbor who insists he once met a priest who could read but probably made that up to sound interesting during a drought. But the seals? Oh, they can read you. Every time you haul a sack of barley to the collection depot, some smug-looking scribe pulls out a tiny carved square of stone, presses it into a wet clay tablet, and grunts. That grunt decides whether you get rations or just the honor of serving your city. The seal has animals on it, or maybe gods, or maybe it's just a confused unicorn. You have no idea. You asked once what it meant, and the clerk said, "This one means barley for civic distribution under temple oversight," which is fancy talk for "we're keeping this." You've seen them stamp your name on things, or what you think is your name. Once, you tried to copy one onto the side of your own water jar, just to feel important. The priest saw it, pulled you aside, and said, "Do you even know what you just wrote?" You shrugged. He frowned. He said it might mean ritually impure donkey. You scrubbed it off with a handful of river mud and swore never to try again. Sometimes, when you're lying in your hut trying to fall asleep to the sweet sound of mice chewing through your last lentil sack, you wonder, what do the seals actually say? Are they just accounting notes? Prayers? Decrees? Warnings? Did you accidentally agree to give your third child to the state just because you nodded when the clerk sealed your wheat basket? The terrifying part? You'll never know. You live in a society with an advanced administrative system, complete with standard weights, record keeping, and centralized planning. And you understand exactly none of it. Your entire existence is archived in symbols that mean more to a lump of clay than to you. A seal decides if you eat. A seal decides if your taxes are sufficient. A seal decides if you get a second plowshare, or if the temple owns your firstborn. It's like living inside a library where the books are in code and the librarians wear jewelry made of your grain. And yet, the seals are kind of beautiful. They have tigers, buffalo, horned men, cosmic trees, dancing figures you once thought looked like you, before remembering you'd never be important enough to be carved into stone. These images outlive you, long after your bones are plowed back into your own cursed barley field. Someone will dig up a jar with a little seal on it and say, "Ah, how civilized they were." They won't find your name, just the mark, just the seal, just the echo of a system you never understood, because you can't read. But your suffering is alphabetized. In the city, when it rains, the water disappears like magic. It flows down clever little channels carved into the streets, neat, tidy, and smug. The brick pathways glisten, but they never flood. The air smells faintly of wet clay and not raw sewage. Children splash in puddles that don't eat their shoes. It's adorable. It's revolting. You know this because once, during festival season, you were allowed into the city. Not as a guest, as a laborer. You hauled grain sacks for 6 hours, nearly crushed a toe under a transport cart, and still managed to be amazed by a city that smelled less like swamp and more like possibility. And then you came home, where the rain doesn't drain, it attacks. When the storm hits your village, it doesn't politely collect itself and head toward the canal. It floods your house. It turns the path to your field into a slip and slide of despair. It mocks your shovel, collapses your storage pit. It becomes the house. You don't have drains. You have gutters made of wishful thinking. Little grooves you dig with your bare hands every season that get instantly overwhelmed because they were built with a stick and a prayer. The water builds up. Your floor rises. Your bed floats. Your goat looks at you like, "Really? Again?" And when the water finally recedes, mud, not just any mud, weaponized mud, thick, sticky, God-hating paste that drags your sandals off and tries to steal your will to live, clogs everything, takes days to clean. You can't even tell where your yard ends and your dreams begin because everything is brown and vaguely tragic. And then mudslides, because why not? Because of course your house was built on a slope. Because flat land is for cities and kings. And your hut? It's the low point of the entire cursed valley. The walls sag. The back room caves in. Your cousin's outhouse gets absorbed into yours, and now you share a toilet, which no one will ever emotionally recover from. Meanwhile, in the city, they have public sanitation. The drains work. The streets don't collapse. Their grain stays dry. Their priests hold rituals under covered roofs. You hold yours ankle deep in wet soot while holding a clay pot over your head like an umbrella that dreams of being useful. You asked once why your village doesn't have drains. The elder said, "Drains are for places with status." You wanted to respond, "So is dignity." But your mouth was full of muddy lentils at the time, so you live with it. You patch the walls again. You dig new trenches. You tie your sandals tighter. And you pray that the next storm hits someone upstream first. Because in the Indus Valley, the city has drains. You have a lifelong membership to the Mudslide Club. And the only way out is uphill. Let's get one thing clear. You don't just farm. You suffer food into existence. You wake before the sun. You walk barefoot through mud that might be water or might be manure or, on a good day, both. You dig, sweat, plant, pray, and occasionally bleed into the soil. And when the harvest comes in, it's not for you. It's for the priest, the man in white linen, the man with smooth hands and sandalwood oil behind his ears, the man who's never seen a scorpion climb up his pants leg while he's checking sesame for mold. That man, he eats first, he eats best. And he eats food that you grew with fingers so cracked and raw they might as well be tree bark. You deliver your grain, cleaned, sorted, presented in a flawless basket you weaved yourself, and he doesn't even look you in the eye, just waves a hand, mutters a blessing, and hands it off to a temple assistant who smells like incense and mild condescension. Sometimes he compliments the barley, never you. Because here's the unspoken rule of the Indus Valley. Holy people are clean. Farmers, we are not. You're too close to the dirt, to the blood, to the animals, to the life cycle that everyone depends on but pretends doesn't exist. They call you impure not in the dramatic curse sense, just in the quiet, subtle way that means you're never invited to the inner sanctum. You stand outside during ceremonies, next to the clay pot of used water and the donkey with digestion problems. You broke your back pulling millet out of flooded earth? That's good. Just don't touch the temple steps with your bare feet. You personally saved the wheat from locusts using a desperate mixture of smoke, prayer, and screaming? Excellent. Now wait over there while the priests discuss sacred agricultural wisdom in the cool shade. They think the gods speak to them, that they're the ones maintaining cosmic balance, that their chants and their rituals and their sacrificial flower arrangements are the real reason the rains come. Meanwhile, you're in the field, tying your own intestines into knots trying to keep the rice from drowning. But when famine strikes, it's you they question. What did the farmers do wrong? Not the priest, not the city officials. Not the broken irrigation system built by someone's cousin 3 generations ago. No, the dirt people must have offended the spirits. And if the priest gets sick, if he has a stomach ache from too much roasted goat and fermented fig syrup, you're to blame. Impure handling, low-quality grain, spiritual contamination from an unclean harvest. So you grow the food, you haul the water, you fertilize the fields, you burn your skin under the sun, and they eat it and call you disgusting, because in the Indus Valley the priest wears white. You wear mud, and the only thing heavier than the harvest is the weight of knowing you're feeding men who wouldn't touch your shadow. Everyone keeps saying you live in a marvel of early urban engineering. They point at the straight city streets, the sewage systems, the intricate seals, the massive warehouses, the standardized weights. Look how advanced we are, they say. You'd love to believe it, but you're holding a farming tool that's basically a rock tied to a stick with goat twine. You don't complain, not because you're patient, but because it wouldn't change anything. The priest doesn't care. The city engineer doesn't even know what a millet root looks like. And your neighbor is too busy trying to keep his hoe from splintering mid-swing. Yes, your society has metallurgy. Yes, somewhere someone is making bronze tools. But not for you. You get the leftovers. The stone plow blade passed down from 3 generations ago that's more ceremonial than functional. The sickle made from jagged flint that cuts the barley and your knuckles. The shovel that has exactly the same structural integrity as a half-eaten cracker. You sharpen your tools against river stones. It helps briefly, long enough to slice into the dirt like you mean it. Then it dulls. Then it cracks. Then you tie it back together with fraying string and stubborn hope, and keep digging. Because the barley doesn't care. The soil doesn't care. The priest definitely doesn't care. You once saw a trader pass through with gleaming bronze implements. Shiny, balanced. He said they were for export. Part of a deal with the lands across the mountains. Too expensive for local use, he laughed. You were too busy mentally replacing every one of your tools with his to laugh back. So you keep going. With your rock hoe, your bone needle rake, your stick plow that only works if the soil is feeling cooperative and you whisper something nice to it first. You marvel occasionally at how advanced the rest of your civilization is, as you personally claw mud out of a drainage trench using a tool that would embarrass a chimpanzee. And when it breaks, again, you don't cry. You just tie it tighter, sharpen the rock, spit on the edge for luck. Because in the Indus Valley, you are part of an urban miracle. You just have to live like a Neolithic intern. Rain is the single most important thing in your world. It gives life. It gives crops. It fills the canals. It also destroys your house, floods your fields, drowns your goats, and tries to carry off your toddler. Welcome to farming in the Indus Valley. You beg the sky to save you. Then you beg it to have mercy. Rain is your god. Rain is your punishment. The season always starts the same way, with hope. Dry, blistered, wheezing hope. The earth cracks like old skin. The canal trickles like a dying whisper. The barley gasps. The priest announces the official start of invocation season, which is city speak for, start praying, peasants. So you pray. You burn incense. You chant. You fast until your sweat stops working. You even let the priest rub clarified butter on your forehead, which is somehow both religious and humiliating. And then one day it comes. The wind shifts. The clouds roll in. The sky booms like the gods just stubbed their toe. Rain. Beautiful, glorious, actual rain. You laugh. You cry. You run outside and let it soak your skin like a baptism of not dying this month. Your ox stops wheezing. Your field starts drinking. Your barley straightens like it heard good news. For 3 days you believe in miracles. Then it keeps going. Then your trench overflows. Then your house starts to weep from the corners. Then your clay walls, the ones you lovingly patched with straw and optimism, begin to melt. Your cooking fire turns into soggy charcoal soup. Your grain stash sprouts legs. Your floor becomes a swamp that smells like betrayal. You scramble to dig drainage ditches, which immediately collapse. You try to save the grain jars, which immediately shatter. You yell at your children to stay out of the water, while sliding face first into a puddle that tastes like goat pee and crushed dreams. And the priest? He's in the temple, dry, holding a Thanksgiving for divine rain ritual, with your best millet. So now you're praying again. But this time it's not for rain. It's for it to stop. You offer whatever's left. A burnt twig, your last good sandal, your sanity. You beg the gods to close the sky. You scream at the clouds. You threaten the river. You curse the entire hydrological cycle. It's personal now. Eventually it does stop. The rain fades. The sky clears. The water drains. The mud begins to dry. And what do you have left? Rotten crops. Dead chickens. A sleeping mat that smells like swamp. And a back that feels like it got kicked by every buffalo in the village. So you start again. You dig. You plant. You hope. And you whisper that same cursed prayer. Let it rain. But not too much. Because in the Indus Valley, survival is one cloud away from disaster. And the gods, they don't check the forecast. From the moment you wake up, to the moment you collapse in a corner with a bowl of lukewarm lentil mush, you're with them. The oxen. You feed them, yoke them, walk beside them, shout at them, apologize to them. You literally build your day around their mood. Because if they don't move, neither do your crops. And if your crops don't move, neither does your soul, or your tax payment, or the priest's barley cake. You know every muscle in their body, every snort, shuffle, and tail flick. You know when they're happy. You know when they're tired. You even know when one of them is about to pretend to be sick just to get out of hauling your 400-pound sled of river clay. You know, because you've tried that exact same move in front of your village elder, and it didn't work. The ox, however, it works for them, every time, because oxen are respected. No, really, they're sacred, blessed, symbolically divine. The priest throws flower petals at them during harvest festivals. The city paints their horns with turmeric and lets them walk through the temple gate. They're considered pure, clean even when they're literally pooping in the street. You're none of those things. You spend every moment of daylight next to these beasts, guiding them, cleaning up after them, trusting them with your future. And yet, if you die in the field tomorrow, the ox will be given a new owner before your family finishes crying. They'll weep louder for the ox. During festivals, the ox gets garlanded. You get conscripted to haul bricks to the temple because you're used to working with animals. During rituals, the ox is anointed. You get told not to touch the offerings because your hands are impure. During rest days, the ox lies under a tree. You build a new grain bin because the last one flooded and the rats are unionizing. You once tried to defend yourself, said, "Aren't we more than animals?" The priest laughed and said, "Oxen don't complain. They just work." So now you stay quiet. You walk behind the beast. You steer the plow. You praise it in public and curse it in private. Because even your rage has to wait until the oxen are out of earshot. Wouldn't want to offend the holy livestock. You feed it better than you feed your children some weeks. You patch its yoke before you patch your roof. And when it gets old, you treat it gently. Because deep down, you know one thing for certain. When an ox dies, people notice. When a farmer dies, people ask if the ox is okay. You can spend all year breaking your back under the sun, watering your barley like it's a dying relative, chasing rats out of your grain store with a stick and a prayer. But it only takes one cough to undo everything. Because in the Indus Valley, Disease doesn't wait for harvest season. It shows up early. It stays late. It doesn't care how hard you worked. It doesn't care how full your granary is. And it definitely doesn't care that your wife is 3 days away from giving birth in a room with one window and a floor made of wishful thinking. The thing is, your civilization is advanced. Running water, public baths, drainage systems. It all sounds great. Until you realize none of that helps you. You live in the dirt. You drink from a canal downstream of a buffalo orgy. Your latrine is a hole you dug with your dullest stick. Your only method of sanitation is yelling at the goat to stop pooping near your food jar. So when someone sneezes, that's not just a sound. That's a warning. And you hear it a lot. At first it's your neighbor, then your son, then your ox starts coughing, and even the priest looks concerned. Nobody knows what's causing it. Maybe it's bad air. Maybe it's curses. Maybe someone offended a god by stealing extra barley during the last fast. Whatever it is, it moves fast. Way faster than anything else in your life. You can wait weeks for your seeds to sprout. But a cough? That's immediate. You go from healthy to half dead in the time it takes to curse at your broken hoe. And medicine? Please. Your options are chew a root and hope. Burn herbs until your eyes water. Ask the priest to bless you with incense that smells like regret. Die quietly and be replaced by a cousin. Sometimes the city sends someone, a healer. He rubs oil on your chest, mutters something mystical, and leaves with your last jar of honey. You don't feel better, but at least your chest is shinier. Meanwhile, your fields don't stop needing you. The barley doesn't care that you're coughing blood. The weeds don't wait until you recover. The priest still wants his grain on time, even if you have to crawl to deliver it. And worst of all, if you do survive, no one thanks you. They just step back and say, "You look pale. Maybe don't touch the barley." Great. Now you're cursed and contagious. In a world where everything depends on the harvest, disease isn't just a health risk. It's a chain reaction. One sick farmer equals one empty field equals one angry priest equals one famine equals one mass funeral featuring you and your goat. And if you die, they'll say it was fate, or the river spirit, or karma. But you'll know the truth. You planted barley. The gods planted bacteria, and they always win. There's this thing people in the city say, all wise and smug, like it's supposed to comfort you. At least your land will go to your children. And you nod, because you're polite, because you're tired, because your mouth is too dry to say, "Oh great, so they get to suffer too." Yes, technically the field is yours. Yes, technically it will be theirs someday. But it's not a gift. It's a life sentence with inheritance paperwork. You don't own that land like a king owns land. You own it the way a prisoner owns a chain. It's tied to you, feeds you, and it kills you. Slowly, painfully, with dirt in your fingernails and rot in your knees. Your children know this. They've watched you cough up blood and still walk to the edge of the barley plot to chase off a wandering goat. They've seen your hands, not weathered like some noble symbol of labor, but cracked, bleeding, and permanently stained. And what do they inherit? The same brittle tools, the same taxes, the same priest who blesses the field once a year and judges you for not smiling enough. The same river that floods every third season like it's on a personal vendetta. You try to teach them how to till without snapping the plow, how to predict the rain by the feel of the wind and the mood of the frogs, how to avoid upsetting the tax collector, how to pretend everything is fine when it absolutely isn't. But the truth is, you're not passing down a livelihood. You're passing down a curse wrapped in millet and dried mud. And the worst part? You have to pretend it's a good thing. You say things like, "Someday this will all be yours." while motioning toward a swampy patch of half-dead lentils and a broken grain bin with rats poking out of it. You call it legacy. You call it family honor. You call it tradition. But it's just the same hopeless math playing out again. Back pain plus floods plus taxes plus divine silence equals survival, if you're lucky. And if they try to leave, if one of them says, I want to go to the city, learn to carve seals, talk to people who don't smell like fertilizer, you say, this is your place, because you don't know how to let them go, because deep down you need them, because the field won't harvest itself, and if it does, it'll probably just do it wrong. So they stay, and you get older, and your bones turn to splinters, and your hands stop working, and your child takes the plow, and the debt, and the exhaustion, and the dreams they'll never have time for, and the land goes on, and the misery continues, because in the Indus Valley, land doesn't free you, traps your whole bloodline. You wake up in a hut made of clay and despair. You till fields that bite your hands. You haul water until your spine sounds like it's chewing gravel. You fight off insects, mold, hunger, wild dogs, and that one neighbor who keeps stealing your lentils. You do this every single day. And yet, when the scribes gather in their neat little chambers, dipping fine brushes into black ink to record the glory of the Indus people, they don't write your name. They don't mention your family. They don't even describe your life. You are footnote material at best. Maybe one line in a transaction seal. Barley received 6 baskets. No context. No credit. Just numbers stamped into clay. You don't get poetry. You don't get myths. You don't get remembered. But the priest? He gets a whole hymn for standing in the right place during rain season. The city official? There's a painted tablet showing him inspecting something you harvested, pretending he even knows which way a plow is supposed to face. Even the ox that helped you survive the worst flood in recent memory gets a symbolic etching on a ceremonial jar. You get to die nameless under your own collapsed grain bin. Your children will eat the rice you grew. The city will store the wheat you threshed. The festival will burn offerings made from your last surviving sesame bundle. And no one will say your name, because history isn't written by the tired. It's written by people with clean fingernails and strong opinions about things they've never done. You tried once, in your own way. You scratched a crude little drawing of your family onto a clay shard and tucked it under a brick in your house. No one saw it. Years later, it probably crumbled. Even the ants didn't care. And the seals? The famous Indus seals with their mysterious animals and undeciphered symbols? You've carried sacks stamped with them for years. You've never been allowed to touch one. You're not even sure if they're warnings, taxes, or elaborate cosmic jokes. But you've never seen one that looked like you. There's no little seal of a hunched, half-starved farmer yelling at a goat while balancing a leaking water jar on one hip and a screaming baby on the other. Which is strange, really, because that's who kept the civilization alive. But no one writes about you. They just eat your work, praise the gods, clap for the priest, and move on. It started raining 3 days ago. First you cheered. The barley needed it. The millet looked thirsty. The priest gave a blessing and the oxen stomped the mud with delight. Then came the second day, and the third. And now, your field is a rice paddy by accident, your hut smells like moldy despair, and your youngest child just lost a sandal that now technically belongs to the river. Your farm hasn't just flooded. It's drowned. The grain is floating. Your tools are drifting. Your hope is somewhere near the temple, clinging to a piece of debris. So what do? Ask for government assistance? Petition the city for canal repairs? Nope. You find a goat, and you hope it's enough. The priest doesn't want your excuses. He wants a sacrifice. A symbolic one, of course. One that shows you understand the gods are angry and that you are the guilty party for some reason. Never mind that the drainage system is cracked. Never mind that the city upstream just dumped half their runoff into your irrigation channel. The divine ledger says your goat must pay. So you bring your best one, or the only one left that hasn't been coughing up river water. You scrub it down with river silt, tie a decorative rope around its neck, and march it to the temple courtyard while pretending not to look too desperate. The priest raises his hand like he's tuning into divine Wi-Fi, mumbles something vaguely ominous, and slits the goat's throat over a clay bowl. You stand there, soaked, cold, hungry, and watching the blood drain from your dinner. And he says, "The gods will consider your appeal." What does that mean? Who knows? Maybe your barley will float back into the rows. Maybe the rats will die from divine guilt. Maybe next season won't start with your child building mud sculptures of drowned crops. But you doubt it, because you've offered goats before. You've offered chickens, incense, lentils, hair, fingernails, and even a half-finished prayer mat once. All in the hopes that a celestial bureaucracy that doesn't even speak your language might give you a break. But the only thing that ever changes is you get poorer, and the goat gets dead. So what do you do now? You rebuild. You salvage what you can. You gather the soaked barley into baskets and hope it ferments into something worth drinking. You fix your hut. You redig the trenches. You lash your roof tighter this time. And you look at your remaining goat and wonder which god is going to ruin your life next. Because in the Indus Valley, natural disasters aren't solved, they're sacrificed to. And if that doesn't work, you can always try a nicer goat next time. It starts as a tickle in your throat, the kind that might go away with a sip of water, if your water didn't taste like yesterday's irrigation ditch. You cough once, twice, a quick, embarrassed little bark, because no one in the courtyard needs to hear weakness before sunrise. But by the time you've shoveled the first basket of sludge out of the canal, the tickle has turned into knives. Your lungs rattle like loose pottery shards, and every breath whistles. Congratulations, you're sick. You'd think that buys you a day in bed, right? Maybe some soup, a damp cloth, a little sympathetic pat from the village healer. In your dreams. Out here, illness is just another unpaid intern on the farm. Annoying, but not enough to cancel the barley schedule. So you keep going. You haul water while your vision blurs at the edges like wet ink. You tie the plow to the ox while your hands tremble so badly the knot looks like a toddler's art project. Every step feels like wading through hot sand, but you can't slow down. The sun is already climbing, and the weeds have a head start. Your spouse notices, of course. You look pale, they say, which is code for "please don't die, we can't afford the funeral goat." They press a cracked palm to your forehead and wince at the heat. The obvious suggestion, maybe sit down, hovers in the air but never escapes their mouth. Because if you sit, who shovels? Who scares the crows? Who carries the tax grain to the depot before the clerk decides late deliveries deserve a purity fine? So you swallow the cough, spit the taste of metal out of your mouth, and pretend it's just morning chill. By midday, the fever is singing hymns behind your eyes. The ox watches you sway and snort laughs like even it knows you're pushing it. The priest strolls past on the road, sandals spotless, commenting on the fine agricultural aroma in the air, meaning the reek of your sweat and the river's rot. You bow barely. He nods, oblivious, and keeps walking toward a lunch you planted and will never taste. You remember stories about city healers, how they grind herbs into pastes, how they chant over warm baths, how they wrap patients in linen soaked with fragrant oil. Out here, the best you get is your grandmother's remedy. Chew a wad of river mint, spit, and hope the gods prefer the aftertaste. You try it. The mint burns, your stomach flips, and the cough laughs its wet, ragged laugh. Afternoon. Your joints throb, your ears ring, and the light tilts at strange angles. You lose track of how many times you've refilled the water jar. Someone's child tugs your tunic, asking why you're leaking from your nose. You tell them it's just sweat and hope they believe it. You can feel the fever flooding your muscles, turning them to rubber. But the barley doesn't care. The tax clerk doesn't care. The priest certainly doesn't care. Finally, as the sky bruises purple, you drag yourself home. Not to rest, gods know. To patch the roof before tonight's drizzle sneaks in. To grind what's left of last year's lentils. To smear another layer of mud onto the hearth so tomorrow's cookfire won't set the wall on fire. Your cough echoes in the tiny room where the baby sleeps. You bite your tongue to keep quiet, tasting copper and resignation. When you do collapse onto your straw mat, every heartbeat is a hammer. The fever sweats you through your blanket, and the smoke from the dying fire claws at your lungs. You whisper a prayer. Nothing fancy, just let me wake up, because if you don't, the field lies fallow, the granary notice comes due, and your family faces the priest's polite suggestion, perhaps another goat? You curl around the ache, coughing into your elbow, counting breaths like borrowed coins. Tomorrow, sick or not, the sun will rise, the barley will beg for water, and the tax clerk will still be waiting with his brick weight and his smirk. Because in the Indus Valley, illness isn't an excuse, it's background noise. And the harvest clock never stops, no matter how loudly your body screams. Tourists, if such people existed in 2500 BCE, would be very impressed with your town. Wide, straight streets, sophisticated drainage systems, multi-room buildings with actual plumbing, standardized weights, geometric brickwork, and city planning so precise it could make a Roman blush. On paper, it's a utopia. In reality, you still live in misery, but now it's beautifully organized. You see, your civilization, the mighty Indus Valley, is the marvel of its age. Archaeologists thousands of years in the future will swoon over your baked bricks and obsess over your tiny stamped seals like they're holy relics. They'll write papers about your grid-like urban planning and how equitable your cities were. Meanwhile, you can't remember the last time you ate something that wasn't a lentil pretending to be a meal. Sure, the city has drains. They're just not for you. They're for the priest's courtyard, for the merchant who deals in lapis and ivory, for the elite houses upwind of the garbage pile. Your house has a pit, a smelly, fly-infested, collapsing mud pit that you have to squat over while making sure no snake has decided to move in. You've heard stories of city wells where water comes clean and cool. You get yours from a sluggish trench that doubles as a goat spa. Once, a fish came out of it with two eyes on the same side of its head. You laughed, then drank it anyway. Your neighbors love to talk about how modern your town is. There's even talk of trade with far-off lands. You just wish you could trade your knees for a pair that didn't scream every time you crouched to tend the barley. Oh, and writing? Yeah, your civilization has that too. Beautiful seals with mysterious symbols no one can read, even in the future. But do those symbols record your birth? Your struggles? That time you single-handedly saved your entire crop from a mold outbreak with nothing but fire, ash, and panic? Nope. They record grain transactions, god names, and probably something about which warehouse is legally allowed to store sesame. No one writes about you. You're not part of the narrative. You're the background character who hauls water past the shiny city center while coughing into your shirt and trying not to collapse from heat stroke. When visitors enter the city, they see brick perfection and polished altars and street layouts that align with the stars. They don't see the farmer limping home on blistered feet. They don't smell the sour smoke from your ruined grain bin. They don't hear the priest saying, "Offer another goat and try harder next time." So yes, your town is advanced, just not your life. Because in the Indus Valley, You're part of one of the greatest civilizations in history, and it still sucks to be you. The market is bustling today. Traders yelling, coins clinking, smells of spice and sweat and overripe fruit baking in the sun. Everyone looks like they're doing great. Everyone but you. You showed up at sunrise, hauling a basket full of your finest barley, your cleanest lentils, your only halfway not moldy sesame. Your shoulders ache, your neck sunburned, and your feet have developed a rhythmic complaint pattern that syncs with your heartbeat. But you're hopeful. Today, you might actually get something good in return. You find your usual spot, not in the center, where the real traders stand under fancy cloth awnings and argue over lapis like they own the sky. You're on the edge, just beyond the dung carts, right next to the guy selling used goat bells and mystery oil. Still, you call out. You hold up your grain. You smile like it doesn't hurt. And you wait. Hours pass. You sell some barley, but the buyer uses a rigged weight. You trade lentils for fish, which turns out to be mostly bones and regret. You try to haggle for salt. The merchant laughs and asks if your barley is even pure. Eventually, you manage to offload most of it. Not for coins. Not for tools. For promises. A handful of IOUs and some stamped clay seals that say redeemable for 1 measure of dried onions. Which is great if you know when next week is and trust a guy whose shirt smells like fermented beetles. By the time the sun begins to fall, your basket's lighter. But your stomach is still empty. You've got no new sandals. No spare rope. No copper. Just a slightly moldy lump of cheese and a bruised fruit someone gave you as a pity trade. You turn for home, passing the merchants who are laughing over their profits. Eating sweets made from your sesame, casually handing polished seals to one another like trading cards. The priest walks by with a new necklace. You recognize the beads. They came from the trader who paid you with a broken promise and a handshake shaped like betrayal. And you walk, back down the dirt road, past the canal that smells like hot sadness, past the oxen that eat better than you, back to your hut, where your kids ask, "What did we get?" And you say, "A good deal," because you don't have the energy to explain that the world is a market and you're always the one getting sold. You sit in the doorway with your bruised fruit, chewing like it might fix something. You count your remaining grain. You check your tools. You stare at the stamped seals in your hand and wonder if the guy who made them ever had to eat one to stay alive. Because in the Indus Valley, you're surrounded by trade, profit, and riches. And somehow you still come home with nothing. There's something cruel about the way the seasons return. The sun rises on a new planting cycle and everyone around you says the same thing they said last year. This one will be better. And you nod. You smile. You fake belief so hard it gives you a headache. But deep down, you know the truth. It won't. Because every year you start over, but not from zero. You start from behind. Behind on food. Behind on tools. Behind on strength. Behind on sleep. Behind on faith. And worst of all, behind on hope. Last year's barley didn't grow right because the rain showed up drunk and late. The year before that, the rats invited extended family. The year before that, your ox broke its leg and the priest took your backup in a holy livestock requisition. The year before that, you got sick and had to trade half your seed grain for herbal sludge and a guy chanting over your chest. But every year, you go back out to the same cursed field with the same bent shovel and the same sore back. You dig into the dirt and try to pretend it's not the same dirt that buried your brother, your father, and your good mood. You spread seed like it's magic. You check the sky like it owes you an apology. You patch the canal like it's a secret lifeline instead of a mud chute that floods when the gods sneeze. And all around you, people pretend it's going to work. The priest gives his annual blessing of fertility, which is just him waving smoke over a jar of mustard seeds while trying not to yawn. The merchants stock up on amphory like they're planning to bottle a harvest that hasn't even sprouted. Even your kids draw flowers in the dust like they don't know better. But you do. You feel it in your bones, which creak earlier every year. You feel it in your tools, worn smooth by too much trying. You feel it in your prayers, shorter now and less polite. This isn't hope. It's habit. It's survival with a performance bonus for pretending. Because in the Indus Valley, no one has time for pessimism. It slows down the barley, confuses the ox. It offends the priest, who reminds you that attitude affects yield. So you don't cry, you plant, you pray, you wait. And when the first shoot breaks the earth, you don't smile. You just say, please, this time, even though you already know, next year you'll be right back here, planting less, praying softer, and hoping against your better judgment. Because in this world, hope isn't something you have. It's something you fake, just long enough to get through one more terrible year. It hasn't rained in 19 days. The ground is splitting like a cracked bowl. The barley's gone yellow. The oxen are licking rocks like they might taste like water. Your neighbor's well smells like boiled sadness. And the last puddle in the canal just gave up and evaporated with a sigh. Clearly something's wrong, and you already know whose fault it's going to be. Yours. Not the city's cracked irrigation channels. Not the failing reservoirs. Not the fact that this entire region is drier than a priest's sense of humor. Nope, it's you. The priest arrives around midday, robes flowing like he didn't just step around 6 dead frogs on his way in. He surveys your dust-blown patch of misery, sniffs, and says the words you've heard too many times to count. What did you do? Because in the Indus Valley, droughts aren't natural. They're personal. Somebody, usually a farmer, offended the gods. Maybe you didn't light enough incense. Maybe you muttered something ungrateful during the last harvest prayer. Maybe your ox gave the wrong look to the moon. Whatever it is, the priests are certain it's not their problem. They're still bathing daily in ceremonial wells, eating from grain you harvested, and sleeping under roofs you built. They haven't missed a meal, but they're deeply concerned about your spiritual hygiene. They suggest a goat, of course, or a chicken, or, for particularly stubborn weather, a small bloodletting ceremony. Of you, not them. You suggest canal maintenance. They suggest humility. You suggest maybe the drought is just, a drought. They suggest you apologize more sincerely next time. You want to scream. You want to throw a mud brick at someone. But the mud's all dried up, and your strength went out with the last good rain. So you gather what's left. You offer the goat. You kneel by the shrine, whispering an apology to gods that haven't shown their faces since the last eclipse. You set your best pot at the foot of the altar. It's cracked, like everything else. The priest burns some copal and declares the ritual complete. He nods like he's solved the climate. Then he walks back to the city, where there's still some water, where the temple reservoir is conveniently full, where no one seems to ask them why the gods are silent. Meanwhile, your family counts the days by how long the millet lasts. Your lips crack when you speak. Your ox is starting to look at you like you might be food. And your youngest child says, "Why do the gods hate us?" You don't answer. You just keep staring at the sky. Because in the Indus Valley, when the heavens close their fists, you're the first one blamed. And the last one forgiven. It's late. You're finally asleep, curled up on your straw mat, dreaming about barley that doesn't rot and goats that don't scream. Then you hear it, the wrong kind of footsteps. Quick, careful, confident. Not your ox. Not your neighbor. Not the priest who's too important to walk this far. No, this is the sound of bandits. Again, you bolt upright, heart pounding like a ceremonial drum. You grab your dullest tool and sprint to the grain bin, too late. The lid's already pried open. A shadow vanishes into the darkness, carrying your last 2 baskets of lentils like they're owed to him. You shout, you throw a rock, you trip on your own sandal. They're gone. You collapse beside the bin. You want to cry, but it's too dry. You think about what you'll tell your kids in the morning, what you'll eat next week, how much longer you can keep living like this. And then the worst part happens. The tax collector shows up. He's dressed well, polished sandals, official-looking seal hanging from his belt like he actually earned it. He carries a tiny weight brick and a deeply unimpressed expression. You try to explain. You gesture to the broken bin, the scattered grain husks, the clear signs of literal theft. He doesn't care. He says the quota's the quota. He says you owe 2 baskets. He says if you can't pay in barley, he'll accept cattle, dried dates, labor, or your dignity, in descending order of preference. You ask if there's a way to file a report. He laughs. You ask if the city protects its farmers from bandits. He says that's not his department. So you cough up the rest of your grain, the portion you were going to feed your children. You hold your breath while he weighs it with his brick, the official one you're not allowed to touch, question, or even look at too hard. Of course it's light. Of course he says you're short. Of course he gives you the look. The one that says, you're lucky I'm not taking your ox too. And just like that, you've been robbed twice. Once by thieves with knives. Once by officials with paperwork. The bandits came at night. The taxman came at dawn. Neither left anything behind but empty bins and new curses. You try to remember why you keep doing this. Why you keep planting, harvesting, storing, rationing, hoping. You try to remember the last time anyone asked if you had enough to eat. You can't. Because in the Indus Valley, crime is illegal, but taxation is organized. And somehow, they both feel exactly the same. You wake up with a groan you didn't mean to make. Your back feels like it's been beaten with a mud brick. Your knees click like broken pottery. Your fingers ache even when you're not using them, which, let's be honest, is never. You stumble to your feet. You're 32, and by Indus Valley standards, you're old. You don't feel wise. You don't feel respected. You feel like a cracked plow being held together by twine, spit, and regret. Your teeth? Mostly gone. The few that remain are chipped, stained, and so sensitive that chewing a lentil feels like biting lightning. You've been gumming your food since your 20s. You don't smile anymore. Not out of bitterness, but because showing your mouth is just embarrassing. You remember when you could run, jump, and work the fields from dawn to dusk without collapsing like a soggy thatch roof. Now you stand up too fast and see stars. Not the pretty kind. The "are you dying?" kind. And what did you get in return for these 32 miraculous years? Sunburned scars. A spine that bends in 2 directions. A reputation for being strong, which really means still alive, somehow. And a hut full of children who already look older than you did at their age. The priest gives you the same look he gives everyone your age. Equal parts pity and suspicion. He doesn't trust people who live this long. It implies you haven't worked hard enough to die. You want to rest. Just one day. Not because you're lazy you can't afford to be, but because everything hurts. Your joints creak. Your eyes blur. Your hands forget how to hold things. You walk with a limp that didn't come from a heroic battle, just a very mean pothole during the last monsoon. But rest isn't for you. The field still needs clearing. The barley still needs planting. Your youngest just broke the clay cup, and someone has to mold another before nightfall. So you drag yourself through it. You nod through conversations you can barely hear. You try to ignore the fact that your best friend died at 28, and no one even called it early. You tell your children, you'll understand when you're older, and then remember, they probably won't be. You're 32. In another place, another time, you'd just be getting started. Here, you're running out of time, teeth, and reasons to keep pretending things will get better. Because in the Indus Valley, old age isn't a reward. It's a countdown, and you're almost out of numbers. The signs were there. The rains came late, then not at all. The river changed course, not by inches, but by miles. The grain stopped growing like it used to. The market emptied. The wells grew shallow. The air turned strange. You noticed first, of course. Not the priest. Not the merchants. You, with your hands in the soil and your ear tuned to the mood of the wind. The canal cracked. The temple crowd shrank. The taxman stopped showing up, which was somehow more terrifying than when he did. Something was wrong. Something big. But no one could explain it. The gods weren't talking. The seals stopped getting stamped. Even the rumors grew tired and wandered off like starving goats. One day you woke up and there were fewer voices. No one called from the far field. No one passed by with a basket of fish. No new smoke rose from the houses across the lane. The city, once a grid of life and trade and shouting, turned quiet. Not in a peaceful way, in a chilling way, in a don't ask what happened to your neighbor way. And still you worked, because what else could you do? You planted barley, even though the ground resisted. You fed your ox, even though it looked at you like it knew something you didn't. You walked to market with your last basket of millet and came home with nothing but silence and sand in your teeth. The priest said the gods were testing everyone. Then he packed up his incense and disappeared. You didn't see a war. You didn't see invaders. You didn't even see a final flood. You just saw everything unravel, brick by brick, roof by roof, person by person. And then one day you vanished too. No farewell, no monument, no last words scratched into stone. Just an empty hut, a broken plow, a seal buried in the dust that no one can read anymore. Centuries later, people would dig up your town. They'd marvel at the urban planning, the drainage, the craftsmanship. They'd call your civilization mysterious. They'd say things like, "No one knows why it disappeared, but you know, you were there. You lived it. You suffered it. And then you were gone. Because in the Indus Valley, you didn't die in glory. You faded, slowly, into the cracks of history. And the only record of your life? A bowl no one understands, a brick out of place, and the whisper of a farmer who once begged the sky for rain." It's been millennia. The city is gone. The fields are dry. The river, once your lifeline, now snakes somewhere else, carving through lands that never knew your footprints. But beneath layers of dust and silence, your life still lingers. One day, a team of archaeologists arrives. Wide-brimmed hats, shiny sunglasses, careful hands and excited voices. They kneel in the earth you once bled into and brush away the centuries with tiny tools and enormous hope. They find a plow blade chipped, smooth from use. A sickle still sharp enough to whisper stories. A broken pot patched twice, then once more when you ran out of clay. They marvel at your craftsmanship. They take notes. They give everything catalog numbers. They call your tools remarkable. They call your house typical. They call your life unknown. Because your name didn't survive. You never wrote it down, you weren't allowed to. No seal bears your face. No tablet records your words. No shrine honors your effort. And so they guess. They speculate. They build museum displays and give tours and write grant proposals about daily life in the Indus Valley. They get most of it wrong, but they admire your tools. They say things like ingenious irrigation, early urban planning, and sophisticated agriculture. And somewhere in there, between the bullet points and the carbon dating, is you. Tired, bent, blistered, brilliant. You fed thousands. You carried the weight of gods, floods, taxes, and time. You planted the seeds of a civilization that now lies in quiet ruin. but no one will say your name, because history isn't written by the farmer. It's written with his bones. And you were the foundation. They just never looked down far enough to notice.